let's get going. Again, if you are just jumping on or you're not quite sure what this episode about is today, here is the question that I shared. Do you want to learn the F-bomb strategy for enforcing boundaries? The basic premise of this strategy is to throw an F-bomb in front of whatever word or phrase you're using to enforce your boundary, because somehow this makes people take it more seriously, even if they don't like it or if they don't understand it. And at the very least, it catches their attention so that maybe they hear what you're saying. Again, whether they like it or not is another topic. So let me see, where are we going here? So that is the strategy. And this strategy was inspired by one of my very favorite social media content creators, video makers. She's known as The Real Slim Sherry on Instagram, and Sherry Diaz on Facebook. It's Diaz. So I kind of feel like saying Diaz because my last name is Diaz, which is Diaz. So all right. Another thing that I want to talk about just real quick with the F-bomb strategy, and I'm going to give you some examples here so you can hear it in real time, is in my experience, dropping that F-bomb using the F word, which if you don't know what it is, the F word is fuck that we're talking about, but we're using it in an empowering sense. And that's my point. It feels more empowering, at least in my perspective. I know there are other people that don't have that perspective, and that's absolutely okay, because it's not for all of us to be and think and feel the exact same way, but it inspires confidence, like authority and authenticity for some reason. At least that's how I have experienced this as I do the work about this. And as a side note, this is going to be a pretty main theme or main topic in this month's Lunar Lessons podcast episode, which is exclusively only on the podcast platforms. It is not on Facebook Live at all. And I share monthly lunar lessons of what I've learned and am learning through the lunar cycle. And that will be coming out next weekend or so, which will be about May 14th or 15th, 2023. If you happen to be listening to this in the future, that should be available by that point. But that is a podcast only on podcast platforms episode that I share every month. So be sure to subscribe to the Rockstar Manifestors podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, so and I said, yes, that this F-bomb strategy is inspired by the Slim Sherry, as you will find her on Instagram. And so here are a few examples of using the F-bomb to enforce your boundaries. And what I mean by that, because that might be something that you're not very familiar with. I wasn't familiar with really what boundaries were when I first started hearing about it. So for example, when you don't want to do something, you say, fuck no. And when you've reached your limit, or you realize you're tired of letting other people call the shots and for you and your life, and you're ready to stop living up to others' expectations, possibly, then you say, fuck this or fuck that. And lastly, the multi-purpose fuck you is appropriate in many situations. So that is the F-bomb strategy, and it's very concise. It gets your point across very quickly, and it makes one word, no, you, this, and that, a complete sentence. No is always a complete sentence by itself, but it turns those words into complete sentences very concisely and very effectively. So now that you know, or that I have shared the strategy with you, I do want to give you this possibly different or alternate perspective on boundaries that was very eye-opening for me. And it's not something, or at least the way of talking about boundaries in this way, is not something that I have come across commonly at all until I was taught this perspective at a retreat that I attended back in February of this year. And we were talking about boundaries at this retreat, and I thought I had a pretty good handle, at least my this perspective expanded my brain. It's like, oh my gosh, it's a whole other level of how boundaries are empowering versus something that should be dreaded or feared or like, it's not quite worth it. So let me keep on going. So if you struggle, I want to make sure I keep on task here. If you struggle with, or you have been frustrated in the past with setting boundaries and or enforcing them, because these might be some of the reasons that you feel you've struggled with them. You don't want to upset others. You don't want to upset them. You want to rock the boat for them. You feel guilty about setting boundaries because you feel like you're going to be letting other people or someone in particular down because they have expectations or desires or wants, of what they want you to do or how they expect you to support them or do things for them. And you might feel guilty about letting them down. You also might be wanting to avoid any pushback that you get from other people by communicating and establishing and letting them know what your boundaries are. And this might lead to that thinking that it's just not worth it. It's just easier to go with the flow, to not rock the boat, to make things, just kind of because it's working this way. So let's just keep doing it. But is it really working? I would argue that overall, on the whole, no. Maybe in little pieces, but overall, not really. But one thing that I want to point out as I talk you through this new perspective or this different is that the common in the reason I just shared with you is that you are prioritizing someone else. You're making someone other than yourself the priority and making what they want or what they might do the focus, and what may or may not be guiding you to establish and enforce the boundaries. Boundaries are for your benefit, more so, or even if at all, than for the benefit of other people. It is for your benefit, for your well-being, for your peace of mind to establish and enforce boundaries and also forgiveness. But that is a topic for another podcast because that is also a very important topic that deserves its own spotlight. So, instead of making other people the priority or the focus, let's turn that around. Turn that around to focus and make the priority what you want, what you will do if the boundary that you communicate and establish is not honored, and how to take the power back for yourself instead of leaving it in the hands of other people. And what I mean by that is when you're in the mindset or the way of thinking that you're worried about upsetting them, you're worried about what they will do, you are giving them the power, whether they will even honor or listen to or acknowledge your boundaries. And so when you give or leave that power in other people's hands or in other people's possession somehow, it is disempowering to you. So this is why making other people the focus and the priority when you're thinking about boundaries feels like it's not worth it, feels like it's too hard, because not only are you going through the process of setting and enforcing and establishing boundaries, you're also using the energy to, establish your power or hope that they will honor it and hope that they value you enough or take you seriously enough to honor your boundary. So, what if I told you that a lot of the times when you're doing this, you don't even have to communicate the boundary to other people? You can. And there are some where they do need to know what it is so that they can honor it. And I'm going to share my story, a story with that, about that with you guys. But turning it around, continually evaluating when you're feeling it's not worth it, and constantly on purpose making yourself, your desires, and your well-being the priority. Because we've all heard the saying, and I've said it many times before, that we really cannot fully be there to support and be there for other people if we ourselves are not fulfilled, rested, have our battery recharged, our resources ready. So you cannot give from an empty cup. And that's what happens when you're giving your power away or letting other people control, whether the boundary is honored or even acknowledged, or whether they think it's important enough, or whether they intentionally make you important enough to honor the boundary. So the perspective here that I learned in the retreat that I was talking about is that, what's the most concise way to say this? It's instead of asking them to do something, or when you ask them to do something, when you communicate your boundary, what will you do if the boundary is not honored or even acknowledged? That's the way you take your power back and maintain it when you set and establish boundaries. So by deciding ahead of time, or even in the moment, take a breath and take a pause and say, what can I do? What am I going to do with my boundary not being honored, with my boundary being broken, when I'm pushing right through that wall and that barricade and that boundary that I set up and not even caring? Because if you're just going to stay in a place, or you're in the way of thinking that, I wish they would honor it, I wish they would do what I ask, I wish that they would take this seriously, that's not an empowering way of thinking and feeling about yourself. So have a plan, or develop a plan in the moment as to what you will do when the boundary isn't met. And it seems very kind of, wait, what? That's it? Just what will I do? Absolutely. And so let me give you a story, because stories teach and stories emphasize, and they really, shine a light or kind of make it clear. In this retreat, when we were talking about boundaries, I shared the fact that back in that time, or back, when was it? It was before the retreat. That's why I was sharing the story. Last year, 2022, sometime, I was living in an apartment with my ex. He wasn't my ex at the time, but so I was living in an apartment, and I was working from home, running my business, working the job that I have. And so I worked from home 100% of the time. And my workspace was in the living room area. It was at the back part of the living room, but that was the biggest room that could accommodate like my office space. And so a lot of the time there was, the TV was on, or, things just kind of like as habit, even if I, or my ex at the time, if he wasn't watching it, it was always something that was just kind of on. And even though I was focusing on my work, simply because the TV was on, it would be distracting. I did try to, put headphones or earphones on and listen to music or something that was a little bit distracting. But even just the visual, right, of seeing images on the TV screen or whatever the case is, was distracting. So, okay, it led to me working longer than I wanted, or not getting as much done as I had desired or had planned out, as I was learning and starting to do at the time. So what I did in this vein, or in this thinking of setting and establishing a boundary, I asked that between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., so 4 hours, that the TV not be on. That way, I could prioritize the things that really needed to get done, the things like when I, making calls or something without having noise in the background or asking that the TV be muted. I said, I need the TV off between 10 and 2 so that I can prioritize getting these things done. And then alternately on either end of that, I could do things that, didn't take as long or didn't require as much focus. And it was easier for me to do with background noise or things going on. And so that was my boundary. Now, that one, yes, I did need to communicate that boundary because it was very specific. Like, please don't turn the TV on between 10 and 2. Now, to his credit, he honored that boundary. He honored that request and found other things to do, or, whatever, I don't know, did something else, entertained himself some other way, or if he wasn't home, then that wasn't an issue. But so I will give him credit for that. What we were talking about in this retreat was, what if someone doesn't honor the boundary? What if you clearly communicate it? And we just played this out with my example because it was easy. It was an example I had shared. So I clearly communicated TV off between 10 and 2 so that I could focus and prioritize my work. Now, the question that was posed to me was, what if he chose not to honor the boundary? What if he said, whatever, I have nothing else to do. I'm also at home. I live here. This is where the TV is, and I'm going to watch TV. So instead of the typical reaction that at least that I came up with, it's like, well, that would really piss me off. And then it might lead to an argument. And then, if I got mad enough, maybe he would then respect the boundary. I had not yet learned or become really fully aware of, put it together about this F-bomb strategy that I shared earlier. But that was the story how I played it out. It's like, well, it would piss me off. I would get angry. We'd get in an argument, and then I'd try and get louder or maybe emphasize more strenuously that this is something that I desire, that I want this. This is something I need to help me accomplish the things that I have set out to accomplish. And so when she turned that back around and started walking through this, it's like, well, instead of letting that boundary being broken mess up my day or keep me from accomplishing the task that I want to accomplish, what would I do? What would I intentionally do? Or what would what action or step would I take if the boundary had not been honored? And in that sense, it was like, oh, well, okay. I had tried. This is how I walked through it. I had tried putting headphones or earbuds or listening to music on. That helped, but it wasn't great. So what else could I do? It might not be ideal, but I could go into another room. I could go into the bedroom and work on my stuff because my stuff is mobile. And so maybe that wouldn't make me happy. That wouldn't be the ideal situation long term. But in that moment or in that day, if my boundary had not been honored, I could go into the bedroom, close the door, and also still put earphones on, listen to music, and get my work done. Alternately, I could plan to go work at a coffee shop or at a library between 10 and 2. If it wasn't, being honored, or to avoid a fight or whatever the case is. But realizing that having that strategy, having something in place, knowing ahead of time what I would do if my boundary were not honored, then that gives me, I don't give away the power. It's not that it gives it to me. I don't give it away. I retain and keep the power and avoid a fight, at least in the moment. Maybe an argument would ensue later. I don't know, because that's not how, like I said, to his credit, that's not how it played out. It was honored. But it made me realize that, oh, I'm letting other people dictate whether I'm happy or not, or whether my boundary is effective or not, based on their receptivity, what whim they're feeling, if they're even making it important enough to remember. So, what is a boundary that you have either thought of establishing or that you have established and communicated, and it has not been honored? First of all, walk through the process of how did it make you feel? And then replay the scenario, tying it back to last week's scripting challenge. Write out the scenario, how you can maintain your power. What will you do when and or if a boundary that you clearly communicate is not honored? And so it may seem trivial, but really it's empowering. It's keeping that power to yourself. You are in control of your life. We try often, but we can't control other people's actions, their thoughts, their way of thinking. We like to think we can, or we try to a lot of times, but it's not successful. It's not healthy. We are only responsible for ourselves, the actions that we take, whether we change our thinking to benefit us, what we do or react or act in a situation. So by doing that, making yourself the priority, then that's how you maintain your power. And now, just to share a different type of example, there are boundaries that you don't have to communicate with people. For example, if someone that you're around, you don't like the way they speak, you don't like seeing how they interact with a significant other, you don't like the things that they talk about. This is very simplified. I like to give space, kind of fill in your boundary or your example that you're thinking about. Or if there's like a family get together, like a family event, be it the holidays or just, a random family get together, and that there's someone that pushes your buttons intentionally or not intentionally, or there's someone that you just get to a point where you can only take so much of them, or there's someone that they're fine until they've had one drink too many, or whatever the case is. You fill in any scenario that you have experienced or that you can think of. And so you don't have to go around to these family events and say, if you drink one drink too many, then we're going to have a problem. Or don't drink more than 3 drinks, because when you get to your 4th, you become a douchebag. There's no need for that. That creates possibly unnecessary friction, unnecessary confrontation. But the premise of setting and establishing a boundary and enforcing it is still the same. So let's go with the person, because I think this is something that you can, check off or look at and see it progressing, let's say. Let's go with the example of a person who, once they drink a little bit too much, they become a not kind person, or they're just their demeanor, their way of talking, whatever it is, you don't like it. Well, you decide before or at the family event, whatever, if this happens, if this person starts behaving in a way that I don't like, what am I going to do? Am I going to go, to another room and talk to someone else? Am I going to go for a walk around the block? Am I going to go run an errand? Maybe say, hey, I'm going to go get, a Starbucks or something along those lines. Is there something else that you can do? Go, play a game with the kids. If the kids, if it's a family event where there's kids and kids are playing or something. But know ahead of time, have a strategy in place And you don't have to say out loud the F-bomb strategy. You don't have to. But if you get to a point where you notice this person is acting in a way that triggers you, or that really that's where that's where you are establishing your boundary, you can say it in your head. It's like, oh, fuck this. No, I'm not dealing with this anymore. You can have this internal dialogue. And what am I going to do instead? That way, you've never even had to communicate the boundary to the other person, but you are still making your desires, your well-being, your peace of mind the priority. And going to take a walk, or, maybe someone else will notice. Maybe someone else will point it out to them if they notice that it's becoming a habit. I don't know. It depends. You might be the person that, addresses this or not. Each situation is very different and unique. So think of examples and start with things that maybe don't seem so big. And that's how you work your way up to things, right? So what is a boundary that you can establish? And if it needs to be communicated, be sure to communicate that to the person. Like my example, please have the TV off, or leave the TV off between 10 and 2. Or if it's a boundary that you don't need to communicate to other people, but you know what you're going to do. You maintain the power. Your well-being is prioritized. Your desires are prioritized, and you avoid going down and repeating that same scenario that has been repeated, family event after family event, or etc. So I would love to know what your thoughts are, what your how you can apply the F-bomb strategy, if it resonates with you, if you love it. If you hate it, that's okay. You are allowed to hate it. You can email me at vision, VISION, at bluemoonmanifestations.com. And that's a great place to share if you have topics or other ideas that you would like me to talk about on the podcast. And let me know how it goes. Share your experiences with me, because that is also very empowering. And if you want to share with a community of people, head over to the Moon Manifesting Rockstars Facebook group. It is my free community, and share your experiences there. And that is what I have for you today. So thank you for listening to my talk about boundaries and the F-bomb strategy, as well as this new perspective on boundaries. And let me know your experiences and how it goes for you. So excellent. See you next time.